Hi, everyone. Welcome to the April Q&A. We have a lot of questions to get through, but if anyone has any that come up as we're going, feel free to write them in the chat. Otherwise, we'll just get started. Harry, you good to go?
I am good to go. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, well, we'll start with a question from Eric Lane, since he is here. It says, what exactly is the role of the Fulton County grand jury being impaneled in May? Are they only considering the special grand jury report and recommendations and voting on whether to indict based on that, or do they call their own witnesses and hear testimony as well?
Somewhere in between. And hello, Eric and his kids who we used to hang with, etc. But they're not only they're a regular grand jury. If the special grand jury never had existed, they would still be doing their same work. And the special grand jury, remember, she asked for it to facilitate certain witnesses and other powers that they had. On the other hand, they're not going to call their own witnesses, I think. I'm pretty confident about that. There's so many witnesses to call. So it's not unusual for any kind of grand jury to just consider hearsay testimony by investigators, law enforcement types. And I think what's going to happen here, they may or may not even be aware of the previous grand jury, but you know, that report, that very thick report, is useful information. They can use it as the prosecutors suggest. But the actual, I think, form of deliberations and getting themselves informed, which I think should start within a few weeks at the beginning of the next grand jury, which will be impaneled in May, will be to just hear everything in an efficient way. So I anticipate, and you do this in the federal system a lot too, all kinds of rules are more lax than they would be in trial. You have somebody who knows everything, even if by hearsay, sits there, talks to them for a couple days even, takes questions and the like. So that's what's likely going to happen. And even though they can use the previous work product, it is legally a nullity.
Here we have another question from Ray Roman. We hear that DOJ and Georgia are looking into the fake electors scheme and the ex-president's efforts to put pressure on state legislators to change the electoral college votes in their states. But we don't hear about local investigators, say in Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin. Are prosecutors in such states just deferring to the feds, or are local political situations discouraging them from prosecuting themselves?
Again, I think neither, though less confidently. Word on the street, such as it is on my little pundit street, is that in fact Arizona and possibly Michigan are now beginning to look into it, as you suggest, although Georgia has that smoking gun of the tape between Raffensperger and Trump. Definitely, there were 2-3 other states where the same plot was pursued, including with input and encouragement from Washington. Some where they hedged, like my home state of Pennsylvania, the phony electors gave a little, if we're allowed to do it legally kind of thing. But I think Arizona and Michigan in particular, there are cases to be made. Can't say for sure they're going to be made, but I think it's becoming pretty clear, and will be even more clear in the coming weeks, that their local prosecutors are looking into it.
This is from Andrew Waldy. Like you, I have been focused on Mark Meadows as the clearinghouse and principal organizer of Trump's election denial campaign. On February 11th, 2023, Washington Post reported that Berkeley Research Group briefed Trump and Meadows 2 weeks before the insurrection on their comprehensive review of claims of voter fraud in swing states, finding zero evidence. Can Jack Smith subpoena BRG researchers if he wants to review the report as potential evidence?
Sure, but even more important, can Jack Smith wind up figuring a way to get Mark Meadows on the stand in a case against Donald Trump to say, now weren't you told with this, do you recognize this report, Mr. Meadows, etc. Meadows's efforts to date to resist testifying, and by the way, that would be admissible under the Federal Rules of Evidence as going to Trump's state of mind. And Meadows to date, his claims for resisting testimony have been just about completely, and within days they will be completely rebuffed by the court. So it comes down to a naked Meadows in the grand jury, and will he take the fifth? And then if he takes the fifth, will he receive immunity, forcing him to testify, which it's a tricky question for the DOJ. They don't normally like to give immunity for such a culpable actor. And as the questioner and I agree, Meadows is as culpable as they come, next to Trump himself. But anyway, absolutely can take it and use it. And one of many pieces of evidence that show Trump was told it was all, malarkey.
Yeah. Will Jim Jordan or anyone else in the gang be held to account for either not replying to their own previous subpoenas or trying to interfere with the state prosecution in New York or anywhere else? Is the only recourse to hope they get voted out?
I think so. I mean, Jordan may get rebuffed in Alvin Bragg's lawsuit. He might be, slapped around and told you can't do this. And it seems like even if he isn't, it's a big political thud. All his efforts the ringleader of the weaponization subcommittee have pretty much landed with little impact. And that might be another instance. But, contempt for previously having done it, or some definitive, at long last, Mr. Jordan, have you no shame, or whatever. Nah, the dynamic here is that the wildest eyed people like Jordan, who, by the way, I think has never sponsored a bill on his own in his life. All he is a, peanut gallery jerk. Is that they have, complete safety in their own districts, and also, are mainstays of Fox News. So not the best hope is not to vote him out, but to vote the Republican majority out, so he can't have his circus, or can't control the terms of the circus, can't be the ringleader of the circus going forward.
Got it. We have a couple questions about the Dominion Fox News lawsuit, but there have been developments since they were sent in. So maybe you can maybe you can also give a quick update on what's happened. But the first question is, in the Dominion lawsuit, are the news personalities like Carlson, Hannity, Ingram being sued also, or can they also be held liable? And then you can also give an update.
I believe they're not being sued, but they were going to take the stand. And by the way, here's a quick little pitch for the Talking Feds Patreon site for those of you who aren't on it, which is I wrote an op-ed on this very point. I think it's the first out in the country, if I can pat myself on the back. And although lots of people aren't jumping to subscribe to new newspapers, you get that all my op-eds come for free if you're on Patreon. But so anyway, I don't think they're sued in their personal capacities, but it was very much in play for them to testify, very much in play for Murdoch to testify, especially after the judge totally excoriated them for lying about Murdoch's official role, and might have been in play. A lot of people are pretty happy about the settlement. I'm not one of them, and it might have been in play for those miscreants like Carlson and Ingram to do a carefully scripted on-air apology, but that doesn't look like it's gonna happen now with the settlement, which is basically $787 million. And just very quickly on that, it probably makes sense for Dominion because their damages calculations were weak and thin, so they get a pretty robust check. But, the case was a very, very rare one, set up to have such a sort of public impact in showing as a sort of social fact that Fox had lied and had influenced the big, misled the American people, et cetera. And that doesn't look like it's going to be happening. Anyway, that's a long-winded answer, Olivia. I'm sorry about that. The short answer is not. I don't think they're sued personally, but they would have had to take the stand, and it would have been a really ugly day for them. This is so, Mr. Carlson, when you said blah, blah, you knew this was false, didn't you? Please direct the witness to answer the question. You knew this was false, didn't you? Yes. We won't hear that testimony now.
And there was another question that you answered in there, but I want to just mention was
Okay.
asked, which is if an on-air apology could be made part of a settlement. But
100%. It's often very, very carefully negotiated out. It's not happening here. And that again, I mean, it shows, look, our legal system is for individuals to vindicate their own rights, but this was a very, very rare case in which Dominion's rights really dovetailed with the public interest, and they completely defensively, went for the money and more money than they might otherwise have gotten, et cetera. But it meant that a real shot in the arm to the public interest. That's the opportunity cost of the settlement. It won't happen now.
Yeah. Last question on this case. If Fox settles, which they now have, how might that impact other possible litigation the company may be facing, such as from shareholders?
Well, that's a really good point. So I thought there's other litigation, of course, again, like from companies like Smartmatic, et cetera. And the people who are championing the litigation say, Fox has showed it'll do a big amount of money. It is a big amount of money. It's 22% of their annual income, but it's an amount they can easily absorb. Yeah, whether or not it's settled, shareholder derivative suits were coming, and they are coming, and they're not out of the woods, but they're able to go on doing what they were doing and take it as inconclusive whether their statement after was pretty wan. It was we recognize that the judge found that some of the claims were false, but this is a very good day for the First Amendment, which we enshrine, blah blah blah, a load of crap. So anyway,
one other question on this, actually, from the chat from Eric: why would folks be happy about the settlement? I wanted to see a trial. I feel like maybe a lot of people are feeling that way.
I feel that way, and I wanted to see a trial both for sort of venal, nasty reasons, but for good reasons too. I mean, the value to the country of having it pretty well established by, seismic evidence that, of course, they knew they were lying, and of course, they contributed to the total toxic effect on the democracy of the post election era. There are very rare cases. This is maybe a little far-fetched, but Brown versus Board of Education stands for the establishment of a social fact that separate but equal is not equal. And there's the Brandeis, we know that as a country now in large part because of it. And we, could have established Fox's role and the media's role in general. Why is anyone happy? Well, they think it's a lot of money. I personally think it couldn't have been much less than that Fox was going to pay. Mm-hmm. There's all these good things in the evidence that they brought forward and in future settlements. My view on that is, but that was already the case. So there's, that it's not that the settlement furthers that. And they take the view, as Dominion's lawyer said, I'm quoting, money is accountability. I don't think that's right on the facts. Money is like a chunk of change that people absorb, and then Fox gets to go on and with its old ways, and even without a really solid branded determination of what they did. But the people who are for it, important amount of money would be where things start. I just think that's why it was in Dominion's private interest, but not the public one. But I do feel, maybe I'm wrong about this. You said this was Eric's question. Yeah. I don't know what he's looked at, but I've been talking to a lot of my colleagues. I was just on, this is why I'm all dressed up on I was just on Chris Hayes. And I feel like I'm kind of in the minority here. Maybe not. We'll see. But I think that's what they would say. So much money, and it really shows. Something like that.
Shifting gears here a little bit. This is about the Second Amendment. Can we apply the travel back in time concept used in the overturning of Roe v. Wade to the Second Amendment, since arms in the late 18th century used powder horns and ramrods, then wouldn't the only arms protected now be those that use powder horns and ramrods?
I'll just put it this way. The originalist analysis of the court for the Second Amendment rights in the most recent case in Bruin, which really had to do with the 19th century, have almost no relationship to the historical originalist analysis in the Dobbs case, which analysis, I've written about, I think is really bankrupt. So, there's a lot of ways which and the court itself was almost open in the inconsistency. So it's a hard question for me to answer because I don't think the right way to go. But I'm an originalist, by the way, but I don't think the right way to go about it is to say, well, they had muskets, so it only protects muskets. I think there's a principle, but I don't think the principle includes, AR-15s and the like. The you know Oh, I'll if the premise of the question is the court talking out of both sides of its mouth and its originalist analyses and for A, abortion, and B, guns, yeah, I think so. Muskets is a sort of caricature. I wouldn't be going there, but so there you have it.
Okay. Is it legal for Idaho to restrict travel to another state for healthcare? This is in reference to one of the recent laws that was passed.
Such a great and difficult question. Brett Kavanaugh puts in his concurring opinion in Dobbs that somehow it wouldn't be legal and you could still go elsewhere. But look, there's already been a state that's making it a crime to help anyone get an abortion in interstate borders.
Mhm.
So if somebody in Idaho is getting a ride to the border from their friend or mom or whatever, they can criminalize that. If you analogize it to, the murder that many people regard abortion as, could Idaho make it a crime to go outside of Idaho and murder an Idaho resident? Kavanaugh's reassurance to the contrary, I find not very persuasive. Now, of course, I don't find the opinion very persuasive, and the question's going to be, what will the five do when this right to travel claim comes up? Let me say, if it succeeds, man, oh man, that what a huge impact that would be, and how much it would give the lie to the supposition in Dobbs itself that, oh, we're just returning it to the states. This would really be a way for people who want to, rub out abortions nationwide, including in states that permit them, to go, to really go very far in doing it. The right to travel, which is what is essentially at stake here, the precedents of the court don't seem to me to fit that well with what Kavanaugh is saying. But since it's all a kind of a make it up area where they're going to want to, maybe temporize, or he will, or maybe not. That's the thing that matters most. It's sort of sad to say when it's a Supreme Court and a Constitution you're talking about. But on the merits, as it stood before, if you put it in the latest version of the AI bot that we'll have in a few years or whatever, I think it would spit out not that Idaho maybe could go after that. If I had to predict, it would be that Idaho won't be able to, mainly because one justice in the center who wants to be thought of as not so hostile to abortion rights will so hold.
Okay.
In the center, in the, a functional center of the court, I should say.
Yeah. I have a question from Terry, who is on the call. Harry, what is the process for changing state electoral maps? Can Wisconsin do it before the 2024 election?
So it's state decided, and of course, it's the most expensive and visible state Supreme Court election of all time, largely, but not exclusively, because of abortion. So reapportionment really figured in, and the previous 4-3 Republican court had struck it down. Is there time now to change it and time to enact it with a challenge? The short answer is I don't know. It has to do very much with Wisconsin state law. So everybody understood that was one of the 3-4 big issues that were in play as a result of the election and the victory of the Democrat, but whether the timing leaves enough breathing room between now and 2024. There's a right answer to it. I just don't know it.
This is from Leslie Wines. Why are
Hi,
many
Leslie.
judges so lenient when arraigning white collar criminal defendants like Trump, who got no bail, and Sam Bankman Fried was released to his parents, who are potentially his co defendants? It all seems so unfair to the guys who end up at Rikers. Thank you.
It does, doesn't it? That's the reason, by the way, the sentencing guidelines came into effect, a real concern that judges look at people like them and are able to sympathize with the claim that they're not dangerous. Now, that is part of the factors in every but bail statute that I'm aware of. And, you can argue that white collar defendants are less likely to go out and commit violence, et cetera. But the basic flaw, or you know the puzzle, the quandary, the challenge that judges and maybe jurors are able to cut people breaks when they can envision who they are and what they're like. I was thinking about this with the 16-year-old who was shot by the 95-year-old. It's just here comes. So he is, if you know the facts, and maybe within his community, he's a really good guy doing really good stuff, but he's the immediate, stranger and villain. So, yep, mainly I think it's like point well taken, and it's an imperfect system for a lot of reasons, but that's a big one. And the flip side of the not putting guys like Trump in jail is they're have gotten really pretty loose on the trigger for putting other people in jail. It's the kind of thing, especially elected state judges. There's always going to be a story, right? That, someone doesn't get bail, goes out, commits a horrific crime, and judges are, human and worried about getting really like put through the ringer as a result of it. So that's probably part of it too.
Here's a question in the chat from Terry. If there is
Okay.
time, can Harry give his opinion on the Senator Feinstein situation, if you have an opinion?
Yeah, look, he's no longer qualified to be a senator of the United States. You have to try to be very polite and treat her with kid gloves, et cetera. But the right public policy answer or whatever is, this happened with Strom Thurmond, who used to dodder around and read things that staff had written for him and was like a non-compos mentis guy. There's, I think, ample indication that she's just not right now up to the job, lifetime of service, et cetera, et cetera. But just right now, not up to the job. She should resign. She should retire immediately. If it doesn't happen, of course, now we get into issues of diplomacy and politeness, et cetera, because no one will necessarily say that to her, but she shouldn't be there. Anybody like William Douglas has happened on the Supreme Court. He wanted to stick in when he was just no longer capable. They have important jobs. They serve the public interest. She's not up to it. She shouldn't be a senator anymore.
Back to some Trump stuff before we finish up. This is from
Oh,
Lauren Markow, who's here. What does Harry think the chances are that DOJ will bring an indictment in the documents case?
85 high. So you look at the whole landscape, and the state cases have their own complication and challenges. And while January 6th really goes to the absolute epicenter of Trump's wickedness as a president, it's also singular for similar reasons, sprawling, caught up potentially in First Amendment defenses, just a harder case to bring. Mar-a-Lago, so clean. And, we're finding out more and more this latest insistence that Evan Corcoran testify as to communications that a court already has found are more likely than not were criminal. And what crime would that be? Obstruction. He screws around with them for like over a year, and then comes this like no turn back moment where he's opting for criminality, that is to lie about a subpoena. It's 100% clear that the anybody doing conduct like this would be prosecuted. I don't know if that really answers fully the question of, what's it mean, equal treatment under law, but they can point to all kinds of precedents, which they can't do for January 6th. It's a basic, clean, and simple case. It's so hard to defend his conduct. There's not even a fantasy version where of all the crazy ass stuff he said, I can declassify with a wink or whatever is real. Are Republicans really going to stand behind it? And then finally, the process. I just think it's quite likely that if Smith recommends indictment, that Garland will go ahead, and I think it's quite likely here. And and reading the tea leaves of the things he's been doing of late, that he will recommend indictment. How you can walk away from the case he's built is kind of beyond me. So I actually see this as because January 6th is kind of an imponderable, and because the state crimes are going to be subject to a lot of challenges, et cetera. I see this next to some of the civil cases. Stay tuned, y'all, on Tuesday for E. Jean Carroll, for and a couple other big cases, but in terms of the criminal docket, this is the one that I think is really coming at him like a freight train, and that we'll see, charges by summer.
I have another question here in the chat. Can you comment on the reasons that you think the Manhattan DA did not prosecute the bank fraud or tax fraud case? Any truth to the rumor they couldn't show reliance because the bank knew Trump as a congenital liar?
You don't have to show reliance for fraud, however. Yeah, look, it's funny because we actually have an account of this, but it's a self-serving one from Mark Pomeranz.
Mhm.
I'll just say this. I was surprised. I think that the case is righteous because while that's tried to be trivialized by opponents taking pot shots as just an accounting stuff or trying to mollify Melania, I think it's clear it's a very Trumpian plot to keep important information from the American people and try to sway, and maybe successfully, an election. But exactly what Bragg was thinking when he mothballed it last January, and this theory versus that, I think is pretty opaque, and remains pretty opaque. But I'll just repeat, as someone who's done a lot of criminal and civil work in fraud, if fraud is fraud, reliance or not.
There is a YouTube video up today, I believe, on this, but maybe you can answer it here too. Thoughts about Clarence Thomas situation?
Yeah. I tried to steer clear of it for a long time because a lot of it had to do with Ginny, who was obviously a very, dishonest and politicized actor, but it struck me as a little tricky, making it a case against him. And also I knew nothing constructive was going to come of it. But this last round of stuff is just indefensible. So clearly worse than the allegations that drummed Abe Fortas off the Supreme Court in the late 60s and sort of changed the whole history of the court. It's, the gift trips. If you go through it, as a matter of common sense, you don't need to see the letter of the law to know that, like, somebody giving you vacations that are worth twice your annual salary is not a matter of annual hospitality and the like. And remember, he was reporting them at first, took some heat in 2004, and then stopped. But it's really much worse because if you read it carefully, this idea that, oh, he was told by, maybe turns out to be Scalia or another dead man who tell no tales. But doesn't, if you read the letter of the guidelines, he doesn't have a leg to stand on. And it's not simply that it's a violation, but he really has had this pattern. I always think about this quote when he got on the court, that liberals made me miserable for 43 years. I'm going to make them miserable for 43 years, 10 of which we still have to serve. That, he's got this sort of sullen, nasty, anti-public spirited kind of approach to it all. And so, yeah, when you combine it with this latest round of revelations, and then the very latest, he maybe got money, but from a defunct corporate entity, maybe that's okay as it works out, but there's just nothing he can say. And it really is bad for the court. No other justice would do anything like this. And, basically people say, why can't Roberts just go in and it shows he's weak? It doesn't. If Chief Justice really doesn't have the power, but a justice does. And, the last people in the world who should be deciding whether this is the personal accountability of hospitality exception are Harlan Crow and Clarence Thomas. And it's such a clearly screwed up situation. He should now be copping to and changing his tune. And instead, he's glowering in a very Thomas kind of way. So I was less inclined than a lot of my colleagues to super pile on before. But now, it's really rank. It really stinks to high heaven.
This is from Frida in the chat. Many of
Okay. Hi,
us
Frida.
Yes, many of us have worked hard for state Supreme Courts. What will happen if the Supreme Court decides with the state legislatures in Moore versus Harper? It seems like when it benefits the states, they want their Supreme Court to have authority.
Disaster if Moore versus Harper. Now, there's some reason to think they'll get rid of Moore versus Harper without facing the question, but an actual ruling, disaster where federal elections are concerned, an actual ruling that in federal elections, state legislatures just to get to control what courts do, even though, whatever power you can imply from the little constitutional mention of them, there's just no valid argument that I see wouldn't be subject to powers legislatures always have, which is subject to the constitutional and other legal restrictions of their state laws as decided by their state Supreme Court. But if the court really says what, Rehnquist hazarded in his two-person opinion in Bush v. Gore and what others have flirted with, it's just a colossal problem for federal elections. We already have, I'm not generally inclined to recommend constitutional amendments, but man, has the electoral system disserved us in the last few years. And something like this, given that everybody knows that state legislatures are disproportionately Republican, it would be a really sick, and not the way my daughter uses sick, turn of events.
All right. If Trump is formally indicted federally, how is it that he can still run for office? Is there no requirement for the president to not be facing active federal indictment to run? And importantly, they say this is from a Canadian viewer.
Yeah. Well, that's correct. There's no requirement. And you can think about it. Well, first of like so much with Trump, it's unprecedented. Actually, this little aspect isn't. Eugene Debs, socialist, ran under indictment or maybe in jail. But, think about it. Let's say the American people really wanted a jailbird as their president. Can you take that right away from them? There's more involved than just Donald Trump. But the short answer is there's no real standards in the Constitution. And it's up to the American people more than sort of anything else is. And we have the irony is deeply presented right now because he's getting clobbered left and right, and it's going to get worse. Everybody stay tuned for the E. Jean Carroll case. But people I respect, I'm not a political pundit, say it's basically over. He's won the nomination. So, if that's true, we have a nominee anyway who's going to be under indictment, maybe convicted. And what's the adage? Democracy is the worst, system in the world except all the others. There you have it.
Exactly. All right. Second to last question. If Trump is put under house arrest at Mar-a-Lago, will he still be able to use social media?
Well, that'd be that would be up to a judge to decide. You have First Amendment rights. All of us on the call do to use social media, but you can have your First Amendment rights taken away as a condition of punishment. And he really is kind of playing with fire with Bragg, say, where he's out there and really doing dangerous kind of tweets. So the short answer is the judge could do that. Now, Trump would be very quick to challenge on appeal First Amendment rights, especially as prominent presidential candidate, et cetera. But, that's been upheld plenty of times before, curbing of First Amendment rights as a condition of the sentence. Technically, you could have more time. Instead, the judge is cutting you a break. So could happen. And, you could see it depending on how Trump comports himself in the next year or so.
Okay.
Although, let me just say one thing,
Sorry,
which is there's no, my fault. I didn't say it. It's just a whole nother ball game. It's hard to know what will happen, because if he's convicted of things that I think he'll be indicted of, how can you not give him time? But, it's a very, very sobering prospect for a former president of the United States to, have be put in the clink and have the door closed behind. And just the mere fact of being convicted for charges that everybody gets time for, I don't think will be the end of the day. It's a separate kind of consideration whether he goes to jail.
All right. And then the last set of questions, there are two of them. They both play to timing of all of this. The first is, I'm trying to find the best over-under for Georgia indictments, and currently guessing May 8th. Also trying to set my expectations on the Mar-a-Lago obstruction indictment timing. And the second question is, will any of the indictments, current and future, actually come to trial before the 2024 elections?
Okay, well, I'm a gambling man. I'll go over on May 8th, in the sense that I think it'll be after that, not a lot after it. Mar-a-Lago, I think there wasn't the House didn't lay down a line in that question, if I heard it right, Olivia, but I've given you my sense of the timing. I think more likely than not, something will come to trial before the 2024 election.
Okay.
There you go.
Excellent. Good note.
Worth what you pay for it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining. We'll have another one next month, and we'll be sure to send in your questions and tune in for that one.
Thanks, guys. Fun as always.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.